I am very excited to be presenting on this. I have experienced a moment of inflection many times in my career, often with great frustration. It was a moment where some product or project is suddenly a success, and it's time to really go because the opportunity is bigger than you thought, or you overcome. And then, how do you actually mobilize the funding or get a commitment to proceed? This shows up all the time in innovation, but many other areas as well. And it's a source of great frustration. So we've been working this problem for about a year with the Innovation Interest Group, and we've got an approach that we think contributes to the root cause problem called the contingency dashboard, and Wayne and I are going to be presenting that. But I think I want to just sort of start with what an executive said. We did some prototyping, and I think this is just astounding. This is a general manager of a $1 billion division, and he says, the value of this framework is the speed of decision making when things change, from taking a year or more to a month or so. In our business, that speed is the difference between winning or losing in a market segment. Now, he said this after like a 2-hour prototype workshop. So I think we're very much onto something. It very much fits the decision professional content, and hopefully this will be a tool to add to your repertory. And ultimately, we would love you to try it out and give us some feedback. So if you haven't figured this out already, I'm David Matheson. I'm the current president, soon to be past president, as my term is ending, of the Society of Decision Professionals. And I've been in this line of work for a very long time, doing lots of interesting things. And I'm here with my co-conspirator, co-leader of the Innovation Interest Group, Wayne Fisher. So Wayne, you take a moment, introduce yourself.
All right, so just a few words of my background. So I'm a Procter & Gamble alumni, class of 2012. Spent most of my career at P&G introducing new innovation methodologies for all things new and improved. I left P&G in 2012 to start my consulting firm, Rockdale Innovation, which really sought to bring a lot of our best practices to other industries, other companies. So I currently serve on the board of directors of both PDMA and SDP. So I literally sit at the intersection of product innovation and decision making. So that kind of spearheaded the interest in decision making and innovation. Our interest group has been active for about 2 years now. And so what we are is we're a forum of decision makers and innovators trying to improve the quality of decisions made on innovation projects. But we're also trying to bring innovation best practices to SDP to develop new products that would serve the SDP audience. And here today, we're going to be rolling out our second major project. So if you're familiar with our group, last year we rolled out the decision complexity card. We've got a second product we want to introduce today. So this is a working group, and it's very hands-on. Yeah, next slide, David. The methodology that we follow is design thinking, straight from Stanford G School. So the key steps, if you're not familiar with that, we interview decision makers, and you see on the left-hand side the folks that we've interviewed for this particular product, to understand them and empathize with them. What makes decision making challenging for them, to find what problems they have that if we could solve would make their lives better, generate ideas, take the ideas that we're most excited about, prototype them, and then go back and test those ideas with the decision makers to say, if we were to provide this product to you, would it make your life easy? So we need to test it and validate. So we've done enough testing and validation with the folks on the left-hand side to know that, hey, we're onto something and we're ready to roll it out to a broader audience. So that's where we are today.
So the little dog there, that's our mascot. That's an iigy, Innovation Interest Group. And doesn't that dog look like it's going to get up to some interesting mischief? So that's what this is all about. So let me tell you what the result of all this is. It's a very, very simple idea. I'm going to kind of headline it, and then we're going to back up and explain it in some detail. So the contingency dashboard, this is literally a screenshot of the first rough idea. We've come to call it the contingency dashboard, a little simpler name, but the big idea is it's a kind of scatter plot. And on the y-axis is whatever the importance is now. So you can see these post-its, C, D, B, and A represent different innovations or projects that are being invested in priority. So C and D are the highest priority, B is a middle priority, and A is a low priority. And then, so that pops out of most, strategy processes, and most companies have this sort of ordering. What we've added is a list of what we're calling X's. Now, an X is an uncertainty or an event that is a function of that project, probably. So, for example, A, which is an innovation project to try a new marketing method, if that thing hits its corresponding X, that is, you hit your customer acquisition target, what that means is that method, which was small and sort of a test before, is actually very effective. And so its priority pops a lot. And so on the x-axis is the priority if X happens. So you can see if all the X's happen, then the priority is A and then B and then C and D. So possibly A can move from the bottom of priority to the top, and C and D can move from the top to the bottom, and B more or less is going to stay put. So there's some different categories. So that's the big idea, to drive visibility and conversations around the X's, the contingencies that could really cause a change of priority. And it turns out this approach seems to solve a lot of problems that these decision makers struggle with. So let me maybe back up a step again now that we've got the kind of big idea in your mind, to say, well, what is a inflection decision? So companies have a lot of momentum. They have typically annual planning processes that are giant scrums. They often cause blackouts in the organization as they try to, everyone arm wrestles for funding and so on. And so there's this huge momentum going forward. And there's some kind of new information. There are a lot of sources of new information. It could, for example, be a product success, right? It starts working, or it could be a competitive move, or it could be maybe you've acquired a new company and now everything needs to be rethought or whatever. But there's some new information which really changes the quality of an opportunity. So like in my example before about the marketing initiative, it's kind of a small test and suddenly it's exceeding expectations. And if you increase its priority, you can pursue a great new opportunity. But there's a lot of inertia. So probably the organization is going to stay on its momentum path and may not even realize that this new information could actually make momentum worse than everybody thinks. So there's a kind of assumption that the momentum is safe when in fact it might not be. So how do you frame this decision? How do you get it to attention? But the fundamental decision is, do we stay on course or do we pursue the new opportunity? So with that in mind, let's just interact with you guys a little bit. Think about an inflection decision that you've come across, or maybe a couple inflection decisions you've come across. And we just want to know, how problematic are inflection decisions in your world? So we've got a scale of very problematic, problematic, somewhat problematic, slightly problematic, not problematic, and not applicable. So I can see some things coming in here. Yeah, there's a lot. The people are still flooding in. Looks like about half of you have weighed in at this point. And okay, that's slowed down, stabilized. So let's close. Go ahead and close the polls and share them if you would. So what do you make of that, Wayne?
Yeah, this is my experience as well. So that, I'm in kind of a fast-moving consumer goods business, right? And so the idea of, once I've committed to Walmart, making that decision to go back to Walmart and say, maybe not, or maybe later. The flip side, if the information is really positive, say you run a consumer test, and it's a stronger idea than you thought, that's a lot easier to accept and embrace. And hey, let's put some more resources on this project and get into the market faster. So it's the downside is really problematic. That once we've committed to a customer, boy, having to go back to that customer and say, yeah, sorry, we're pulling the plug is really, really difficult. So I can certainly relate to this.
Yeah, yeah. I would also invite our audience to open up the chat, and if you want to do commentary or share examples, I mean, I think we can all enrich each other with our experience. So go ahead and do that if you would like. We will be generally monitoring that. If you have a question you really would like answered, put it in the Q&A so that, because it queues up differently for Wayne and I, and we can respond in a more focused way. All right, well, thank you very much for the poll. So this is problematic to very problematic for folks. By the way, the poll pop-up, you may have to click the X button to get it closed. It might be covering your sharing. So let's go on to another poll, like, okay, so what? And I want to riff on what our executive said. Let's frame one of the issues as speed. So, of course, it does take time. When you learn new information, there's a natural time it takes to understand the new information and so on. But the question is, how long between kind of detection? So you have the event happens, then it somehow penetrates an organization, which may or may not be monitoring this. And then it becomes clear that something has happened. And then you got to mobilize a response. So what's the time to an effective responsive decision? And I want to define speed here in terms of consequences. So our executive started with essentially some version of disastrous at the bottom. That is, if they take a year to make a decision, they basically lose the segment. So it's pretty consequential. So you could make a little less, maybe you lose the opportunity, but it doesn't have secondary consequences. Maybe you're just kind of slow, so you're frustrated, or there's some kind of loss of efficiency, but it's not objectively all that costly in terms of the primary opportunity. Or fast, you respond in a timely manner, and it doesn't have a lot of consequences in terms of time. So I see folks have started to put things in here while I've been defining some of these things. We have a lot coming in at slow. It's stabilizing. So why don't we go ahead and close the poll and share it? Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. A lot are slow and then a lot are late. So the catastrophic ones are particularly dangerous. What are your thoughts on this one, Wayne?
Yeah, so again, this is the good news, bad news scenario. So typically in a stage gate process, you're telling the senior leaders, we're gonna be back in 3 months, and we're gonna be ready for the the gate 3, the money gate review. If it's good news, you stay on schedule. If it's bad news, hey, we need a little more time. We need a little more time. So it's the slowness of sharing bad news. I think that is problematic.
Yeah, I think another thing we've seen has to do with the time constant of the planning process. This executive I was talking to, they have an annual planning cycle, and sometimes something will happen, and if you respond in the next planning cycle, it's basically too late. So I think one of the reasons this guy liked this framework is because he basically uses personal power to override the planning process to frustration of his organization, because he's seen as kind of controlling, a little too controlling, and he's doing it because of this speed. And so this contingency planning framework gave him a way of being more open and even-handed and clearer about all that. So that's the issue for him, was the speed of the planning processes in relation to the speed of the required response. So we think there's probably something quite systematic about speed in this area. Now we have some data on this, which I'll get to in a minute, but let's talk about a number of the reasons that our executives have said inflection decisions are hard. It's basically a good news, bad news situation. So somehow an inflection creates a major new opportunity and it's time to pursue it. yay, go team. Everybody's so happy about that. It's so exciting. We've made the breakthrough we've been working on. We talked to a number of people who said, I'm an R&D person, I'm an innovation person. This is what we've been trying to do for years. It happened. It's time to go. And then there's a big splat because nobody moves, right? Created tons of customer interest. Again, this is maybe a bit more in the innovation or perhaps a marketing thing where suddenly you're getting uptake and you can't respond to it. One executive told us that they started to get so much success that the competitors got interest. And he was arguing to the CFO that they should invest more to make this the opportunity, take advantage of the opportunity that they had in fact created. The CFO said no. And so what happened is the competitor did what they should have done, and they lost the market they had created. I mean, it's just astonishing. Competitors can move things, and you keep investing in an old line of business that really doesn't make any sense anymore, or you're too slow to respond to a declining situation. We also heard a number of examples about mergers where suddenly you have new channels, new customer set, new skills, and there's this giant kind of merger smush that slows you down too much and can't take it back of it. Now, so all that's sort of exciting and consequential. You can go, go, go. It's great in some hand. The problem is essentially anxiety, complexity, or replanning. So as Wayne has suggested a few times in the P&G stage gate process, at gate 3, they commit to Walmart. Well, suddenly there's a lot more hand wringing because that's a major commit. Another pattern we saw was you might have a little project that starts to grow, and at some point it shows up on somebody's quarterly P&L. It's been sort of below the radar. And then there's a whole new level of scrutiny. So even if it's the best thing ever, it creates anxiety and visibility, and that starts going. So those are new players come in. They have new concerns you haven't anticipated. You know, if only you could have anticipated it, you might have gotten those concerns vetted early. But there's a lot of new things that get forced when this happens. The sudden increase in money invested, people assigned, and so on. And usually, maybe that's a visibility anxiety sort of thing. But there's a very important complexity issue, which is if these things become significant, you have to deprioritize something else. And this is at the root of many, many of the problems. There's an element of an inflection decision, which is a portfolio context. And so that creates a lot of problems, both in leadership, like you just agreed to my plan and now you're changing it. So people really feel jerked around and it destroys trust in leadership, as well as just the practical matter of you've released a bunch of budgets and people and you got to sort of unwind them and redirect them. And how do you do that and communicate that in a responsible way? So those are some of the yeah, go ahead, Wayne.
No, David, just to process point. Unfortunately, the default in the chat, if you're chatting, is to just David and I. You probably want to change your default to chat to everyone. But David, there's a question in the question and answer that you can address. Jem suggests that being tied to the federal government kind of takes away some of the discipline imposed by being in a competitive market. And that's why, and Jem, you can let me know if I'm misrepresenting, but at least in my observation, once a federal program gets started, there's no stopping it, right? So wouldn't it be great to have the discipline when you start a major program to go through the X conversation and say, let's be on the lookout. If this happens, then we should revisit the decision to continue this program. And it does seem like that's just absent from not just federal government, but government programs in general.
Yeah, indeed. And that's a good point. Thanks, Jim. And I would certainly invite, if you have other places you've seen inflection decisions, where do they show up? What's hard about them? Please do drop it in the chat. I think there's a nice qualitative element we can get there. I also see that Ankit has put a question in the Q&A box, and I'm going to get there. So if I don't get to that, if I don't answer that question over the next few slides, then let's come back to it. Okay, so inflection decisions are hard. So this is all very qualitative. We did some statistics on this. I wouldn't say this is scientific, but it's quite illustrative. So Wayne and I went to the PDMA conference to talk about innovation decisions, in particular gate 3 decisions, which is where the resources typically go up in a kind of business process. And we used iigy's first product, the decision complexity card, to say how tough is this kind of decision. So a gate 3 decision is a kind of inflection decision in many cases. And so we had them rate their gate 3 decisions about how complicated they were. And you can see the little post-it or the flip chart there. 15% of those decisions are simple enough to be done in a routine way. Well, that's what the stage gate process assumes, is that they're routine decisions. So that means 85% of the decisions at a gate 3 decision are not are too complicated for a routine process to handle them. And 25% are actually in the decision complexity danger zone. So it's quite systematic that we have organizations that are not able to respond to this, even in business processes that are designed to create inflection decisions. So there's something kind of missing in some of this. So we did our qualitative. So let me back up now to the design thinking process to give you a sense of what this is doing and how it works. So we interviewed 8 or 9 executives, and the interview question is pretty straightforward. Can you think of an inflection decision? And then you ask what their experience was of that. And if you're interested in this, how do you interview for experience? Then join iigy, and we'll help you through this. And so we interview in teams. So I just went with Bill Dahl, and if you're shout out to Bill for being one of these interviews. I just selected this one as a good example. What we've got here is quotes and defining words. These are things they said. You can see this sort of face here. These are visible things, actions and behaviors. So what happened here is that this is a technology breakthrough that everybody had been hoping for. And what Joe is saying is this news happened, and he went to his peers. He's the CTO. He got his marketing person on board. He got his CFO on board. He got all the kind of functional heads on board. And that took a couple of weeks because they had to understand it and really get it. So you're like, okay, that's just understanding the implications of the new information. Now, on the right, we have how he felt about it, things you don't know that he's not saying explicitly. And his experience of this was it took months and months and months to take a decision, an opportunity they'd been waiting for, that everybody agreed they should do, and to actually get so you could make a sort of theoretical decision, but to make the actual decision took months and months and months. And he was basically frustrated. He was afraid they were going to lose it. He was very much at stake because he's rearranging priorities, and so that puts a lot of political pressure on him. This was kind of his thing. I put it in bold here. The problem isn't the primary decisions. It's the cascade of secondary and tertiary decisions that have to be revisited. And I think we as decision professionals call this, quote, implementation or change, and we do ourselves a disservice because that lets us have the comfort of only focusing on the one thing, when in fact that's not the problematic part of the decision. So if we're going to be of service to leaders, we've got to find a way of expanding our thinking to make it easier to deal with this whole cascade. Now we can't look at every little decision, but we have to have some way where they can make the primary decision in the context or with visibility to all these secondary decisions, so it's not a surprise. So that's the first kind of aha. And many of the executives have elements like this, where it's this cascade, and framing it as just a single inflection is actually a misframe of the problem. So that's complexity. Here's another one. This one, I was joined with Amy, and this issue is visibility. Now, what's so delicious about this project, this guy is doing marketing explorations, and he's got a new marketing program. It's completely under his control. So he's the executive in charge of it. He does this program. He sees that this new experimental marketing is performing far better than any other marketing program he has. So this goes from a sort of theory to the best option he has of anything. It's just, and then he didn't take action. And he's quite frustrated with him. I mean, he funded this project. He saw the results. He knew he should do it, and he didn't do anything. It took him 2 years. And then his role changed, and suddenly that like shook up his brain. And this was the first thing he implemented in his new role. And so so there's no complexity of anybody else. That's what's so interesting about this one is here's a guy who feels guilty that he didn't do it. But when he got right down to it, his primary focus was elsewhere. This was a new thing. He had a lot on his plate. All executives do. And this was a great opportunity with immediate payback, but there wasn't any cue or sense of urgency to drive the decision. So he has this mindset with all this momentum in it, and it's just cluttered. And so this new thing comes up, it's a little flashing light. It's easy to ignore. And so he's looking for a way to just have this much more in his face. So he questions the momentum in a strategic way and doesn't have to do all the heavy cognitive burden of like declaring the decision and really thinking it through and getting that all mobilized. So this is the visibility problem.
Yeah, David, the only thing I'd build on this one, sorry, is it's really well known that if you think about your X's in advance, which is just not human nature to do, but that provides you with the signal, right? So you've committed, it's an if then. So if this result from this program is this, I'm committed, right? I will find a way to get that program implemented, or vice versa. The X analysis of we all agree, we're going to do this experiment. If we don't like the answer, we will all feel good about, making the inflection decision.
Indeed. Okay, so there's one more, I think, major theme, which is threat. And this is the president of a major division. And he said early in his career, so he's in a tech business. And what happens in this line of business is that every 4 or 5 years, there's some new invention and the whole industry reshuffles around the new invention. So they really do come up with better ideas. That is the world that everybody knows and lives in. And he saw that a new technology would potentially just be a better product. And he is in there's 2 lines of business. There's a main line of business using the old technology, which is about $1 billion in size. And the new business is exploring the new business, and it's like 10 million. And he sees exactly how to make the new technology serve the need of the old business. So he figures this out. And he's like a director level at this time, and he figures out the project plan and the uncertainties, and he goes and proposes it to the executive team. He's being coached by his VP. And you can see on the left quotes and defining words. It was perceived as an attack on the heart and soul of the core business. So he got basically laughed out of the room. And he did say, if you look at feelings, he was embarrassed by the way that the team managed the situation. He had personal consequences for several years, squelched his innovation. I mean, as a leader, it was a big setback, and he is still scarred 20 years later about this thing. And he has sort of made a personal one not to do this to anybody else. It was formational for this guy. But it was perceived as an attack on the heart and soul business. He felt that if his company didn't do it, his little division, the competitor was going to do it, and then there'd be no hope. And they said, that's not possible. You're the only person who could have figured this out. We're smarter than everybody else. And so they really deflected and wouldn't listen. About a year later, the competitor launched the product that he had envisioned. And the core business started collapsing as he predicted. And the very interesting thing was, because he was a relatively junior person, he was viewed as not qualified to be part of the project plan to develop the product that he had proposed. So there was this giant all hands on deck panic scramble that could have been completely avoided. And so he felt in this, the the conversation around threat is a tricky one. And in this, he didn't establish how vulnerable the status quo was. He was a young guy. He just thought, yeah, they'll see it right away. Well, there's a lot of defensive reaction. You have to warm people up. You have to prepare them for the possibility they're going to have to turn. Otherwise, it just looks like threat, and that creates all kinds of bias and discussion. So there's a whole set of issues around this from many executives that are basically, you're moving my cheese. This is threatening. I don't like the news, and so on. And that makes it very hard to hear or understand the implications. So that's a third major theme that we came across from these. So what are you doing?
All right, David, I'm sorry,
Yes,
just
please.
to interject again. 2 points from Stephen Glickman. Thank you very much. First point is David and I did not get the memo. So apparently we misled you into thinking that you could chat with everyone. I didn't understand that technology limitation, but so yes. But if you chat with the panelists, we'll certainly echo your comment. His comment was that others have called these X's tripwires. So perhaps a better term than just X, tripwires. So thank you for that input.
Yeah, good. Okay, so those are some of the themes, and so what we invented was this contingency dashboard. So what is this doing for you, right? So you have a momentum. The y-axis is the importance. Now that is a representation of the momentum. And then by taking each of the major project areas and inviting a discussion of the X, or the tripwire, then you bring that into kind of a public space. So this works socially as much as it does analytically. And one of the interesting things folks said in doing this was it's important to not treat it like a brainstorming project. You're not trying to come up with all the X's. You're trying to come up with the X's that actually matter and need to be communicated and discussed. I suppose, being a decision professional, I'd like to look at all of the uncertainties and maybe use that to inform the X's. So that could be part of this. But the point is that there's a moment where the big X's get discussed, and then you look at what the priority would be after the X, and then the discussion of how the priorities change. So you'll notice in this example, the old priority, C and D are high priority, B is middle, and A, and the new priority, A is high, B's in the middle, and C and D is low. B doesn't change very much. So there's not a lot of contingency thinking that needs to be happening around B. So that's kind of the idea. There's a grid format here. We've learned in our pilots that there's a table version also. So here we have the investment. These are my A, B, C, and D. And then there's a current priority, 10 being high priority and 1 being low priority. And this is just a simple scale of 1 to 10, and I will report that a simple scale of 1 to 10 works pretty well in a kind of workshop context. A list of X's: hit the acquisition, competitor beats us to market, new technology disrupts the business model. This, by the way, D is the story from that other executive, right? So this is the existing line of business. It's very high priority, but if a new technology were to disrupt their business model, we'd be in salvage mode here, not full investment mode. And then you say new priority. So what we found in actually deploying this is that there's an interplay between the table format and the grid format that serves as a nice sort of dynamic to help drive a conversation. So we've done this here. It is doing a workshop. You can see me and Amy and Harshal there. This is a little table. You can see we just drew this on a whiteboard. Here's the grid, Post-its with a parking lot in the background, the order before, the order after. I mean, it turns out with decision professional sort of facilitation skills, this is actually very, very easy to do. It fits very much in our wheelhouse for anybody who's reached a sort of mature decision professional level that integrates the facilitation and the analytics. It just goes really well. And what in this particular one, the general manager, after a 2-hour workshop like this, turned to his head of strategy and says, work on how to make this practical in our actual planning process, not just like a one-time event. So this is pretty powerful stuff. That's why we think we're onto something. So let me give you a little guide, though. Let me pause here. Any kind of questions about understanding that we need to throw in here? Because I'm going to now get into like a guidebook for how to do this. Or do you have any comments, Wayne?
No, but we've got another question from Doug in the Q&A.
Oh, yes. Okay, so this is, do you think that contingency data is appropriate at a company level or at a lower level within an organizational BU or division? We've tested this, I think, in divisions and within areas of major functional responsibility. So for example, Joe Dennis, who's the CTO, did it in the context of, I think, innovation projects for a major division. So it does seem to have some, it does have to be a point where things are integrating to serve some scope of business purpose. So there has to be like a natural portfolio point. And I think it would apply in many of those areas. So I think the answer is not just the whole company.
Yeah, I would echo that, David, because, at Procter & Gamble, we're a brand management company. And so those kind of investment decisions are made within a brand. There's very little brand crossover of capital investments or resource investments. So it's like you're running your own billion-dollar company.
Okay. So we're going to focus on the workshop style. I think our iigy have not really developed very much the kind of integrated into the process, although it is kind of our frontier. So here is the guideline. Assemble your group. So part of the value is the conversations created and the preparation of having the trigger points discussed. It isn't strictly an analytical, like if you just gave people a list of the X's, it wouldn't have the same effect as if you had them discuss the X's. So get a group together. We have found it not really problematic to get people to list their X's. You just sort of have to define it a little bit and use a little facilitation, and they'll start flowing pretty easily. So assemble a group, and if you're doing it in an actual workshop, get some tape or something and make a grid format on the window like I showed you before, and then draw a little table somewhere on a whiteboard or whatever. Now, if you're doing it online, you set this up in Mural, and that's sort of the prep. So then everybody comes together. And the first thing you do is just identify the investments. In our workshop, it was always pretty clear that there was a top 10 or 15. Again, it was not problematic to identify them. And those seem to be the one that matters. You could make it more comprehensive. We didn't explore that very much, but get the investments that people care about and rank them on current priority. We just did it. What's the most important, and put that at the top of the grid. And what's the least important, put that at the bottom. And then we just defined the most important is a 10 and the least important is a 1, and we just had them do relative ranking. I think there was some feedback that a better quantitative ranking, like on an NPV or a ENPV, might actually be good preparatory work. But priority isn't always strictly financial. And so by having them discuss the current priority, you actually start to reveal some of the whys, and it can help the discussion. So that step's pretty easy. And of course, you put it on the table at the same time. Then for each investment, you identify an X. And the key is, I'm not looking for anything small. I'm looking for stuff that would change the priority. Is there something that is plausible that would change the priority? And again, we're also not looking for, it's not like risk management. You want low probability events. We're looking for sort of 10, 50, 90 kind of events, something that could plausibly happen. And and or could reasonably be anticipated. So define an X, and then you, looking at the X's, you say, well, how does the priority change? And we have found this, you do it line by line. This project, if this X happens, goes from a 7 to a 4. You just change the number, and then you reflect that on the grid. And then you discuss current versus inflected priority. So have that discussion and what you're going to do about it and so on. And one of the subtle things to notice is that some projects change priority because the X happens and they change priority. But other projects change priority because an X happens on a different project and something moves around them. And those actually are the really problematic ones. Those are the ones that have to be prepared, because that's the complexity of this situation. You've got to get people to realize that this project, this innocent project, may get deprioritized because something happens somewhere else, and get that discussion kind of in the room. So I've just sort of verbalized this sheet, which is a saying, which basically says what I pretty much said. There are a couple little tricks we've learned along the way. When you define an X and get your inflected priorities, what we found is X may have two versions. So there could be an upside X and a downside X. So just put it in twice, one for upside and one for downside. So it'd be something like, we're investing in an area. If customers don't respond, we need to cancel it. And if we do get high uptake, we're going to double down. So something like that. We explored whether there'd be two versions of X, like an X and a Y or something. And that didn't happen. I mean, usually there was one big X for each one. The other one was, you might need to expand the scale. So the way we did it, whatever was the most important was by definition a 10. And somebody would say, well, geez, if that happens, then this is going to be a 15. So the scale doesn't actually have to be strictly pinned down. It really is just a relative scale. And we found you can be quite flexible in this workshop style. Then when you discuss the changes, here are some discussion points. What investments have the biggest changes, up or down? And it's important to note that there are two ways that priority can change, because this is the investment. At the investment itself changes, or stuff changes around it in a portfolio that displaces it. So you want to watch for both those things. And then, what are you doing to prepare for the change? Who are you monitoring? Have you informed people? Are they ready? How do you create checkpoints? And then, what's stable? So those seem to be helpful conversations to have. Anything to add, or any questions?
No, I think that's good, Dave.
Okay, so let me tell you what some of the feedback we got from this. The feedback basically says this concept, you've got to think of it as sort of an analytical framework deployed socially. And many people said that this contingent thinking prepares action. So speed to decision, speed to execution. I would add speed to detection. Probably I should have put in here. Just thinking through the X's and their implications had a positive effects. One guy said he's going to just start asking his teams what their X is. And he could think of many cases where a anticipated X happened, but because in project planning, people get so focused on delivery, they don't have a lot of mind space for an X. So he was talking about just asking each of his teams to have an X and make sure they monitor it. There's a kind of bias thing. So people are stuck with what is and can't imagine stuff. So in our whole profession, we know alternatives are so important and scenarios are so important. And this guy's point is, there's a kind of bias or blind spot, and just have one X changes the conversation about potential disrupt. One of our executives, who's the CTO, says this helps him communicate with his marketing counterparts. Why they're a little frustrated, because sometimes he zigs and zags and they don't really know why. He's like, can't you stick with the plan? And he's like, no, here are the things that I'm trying to zig and zag around. So he felt that would be good. Knowing something's on the bubble helps with reallocation. So if you're on notice that something could happen, and indeed some folks generated ways of having resources that were always on the bubble. So he said there's a value, one guy said there's a value to having projects that end quickly, because then every 2 months they're restarting. So you have a resource pool that you can reallocate on a quicker time scale than a longer term commitment. So there's something in here about having projects that have different time scales, which will let you maneuver in a portfolio. We did not unpack that very much, but it's clearly part of the sort of how do you make it routine problem. Okay, this sets triggers. One of you already commented. This was a leadership comment. So if you've got a small idea and you go pitch it to executives, then they say no. So leaders don't want to say no because it's discouraging. And when you hear a no, you get discouraged. So if you had this idea of X, you could say, yeah, it's a no now. So I proposed to do the new thing, but what could I demonstrate that would make this higher priority? So what would have to be true for there to be a yes? And that will increase the leadership development of the people proposing, as well as give the leaders more ways to delegate responsibility and maneuverability. So this was a kind of leadership part. The guy who was scarred by getting a no when he pitched his very threatening, he was all over this one. A couple of people said, we do talk about all this. It's not like we're idiots, but it's just not systematic. And so this gives a way to focus the discussion and make it more effective. Again, I think executives know this is going on and they don't know how to control it. So they pull in power so that they can individually make a decision, and everybody else feels just jerked around. So there's a kind of power play, which is being done for good reason. But if you can make it more systematic and more visible, the leaders can push out the power, which they desperately want to do. And the last comment is high insight for little effort. I mean, that's sort of the 2-hour version. The workshop participants also imagined lots of ways they would like to use this and incorporate it. So let's review this once a quarter. So, we don't want to have it completely dynamic, but once a year is too slow. So maybe once a quarter, we can have an executive discussion. How do we make this part of the planning? We don't talk about I'd like to be better prepared. So we had tell us an X in a 2-hour workshop, and they came up with stuff. But one of the executives was like, I'd really like to talk with my teams, make them think it through. It was clear from some of these examples that there were top-down corporate X's, things that could change, like a merger or something that would ripple through a lot of things. And there were also project-based bottom-up X's, and both probably needed to be developed, possibly in advance of the workshop. One person said we get distracted pursuing projects in our stage gate meeting. In a stage gate, there's an assumption of unless there's a flaw, we're going to proceed. It's sort of the underlying implicit assumption. And this guy said at each gate, we should identify X's, not project progress, but changes information that would cause us to change if we at our next gate meeting. And maybe we can get some better quantification on. So that's all the kind of improvements that they talk about, the kind of things people are excited about. And that's pretty much what we got out of that. Now, the iigy group has thought a little bit about how to make this more routine. And let me just do a kind of quick layup as an example. I don't claim that this is well developed. The contingency dashboard is well developed. It is ready for use. But this is kind of an extension of the idea. So if you have a business process that's doing tornado diagrams, you actually have all the data you need. So this is an example of this is a kind of mock-up portfolio with a bunch of projects in it. Here we're looking at the project breast strips. It has a tornado diagram as part of the existing planning process. So if you have that, and many of us decision professionals would be developing this sort of thing. So if you're planning project, then the current priority is given by an expected value, or I just went here with the P50. Your mileage will vary, of course, depending on your situation, but that tornado gives you a relative ranking. And on the right, here's the tornado of one project, and here are the range of uncertainty from all projects. And so this one, breast strips, is down here at the bottom, but that P50 is the middle of the bar. It gives you a kind of ranking. The X is whatever's at the top of the tornado. So here, market size. So what would you know about market size that could change it? And then the 1090 of the tornado tells you how things might change. So you see I've got a current ranking from the P50s. I have an X's from the top bars of the tornado, and my probability analysis has shown me the change in the figure of merit and therefore the change of priorities. So in this configuration, each X goes two ways, and it's being inspired kind of analytically. And so all you have to do is format this as a contingency dashboard. So on the left, we have the P50, and then here are a bunch of projects. This is it, if it inflects down, if it inflects up. And if you put this in some kind of system, you can actually show how things changes. So at the current P50, it's banana, honeydew, jackfruit, grape. That's the priority order. But if things inflect up, so apple is going to have more relative improvement than banana, and so apple will cross above banana. So you can see the relative rankings are going up or down as showed by how the colors are working there. So you could do that. As I was reflecting on this, I realized I wrote a little article about, I don't know, a year ago on making uncertainty your friend in forecasting and goal setting. So there is a little link right there. If you are interested in, it's not directly relevant, but it does, I mean, it's relevant, but it's not directly about the contingency dashboard, but it's about how planning processes work. You might find that interesting. So go jump on that if you'd like. So with that, we'd like to know how we can support you in using the contingency dashboard.
And David, I think I'll check with Hilda, but I think we can hack this and use the Q&A to answer these questions instead of the chat,
great,
which is disabled. Great. So yeah, if you put it into the Q&A.
Yeah, I think we might take this work approaching the top of the hour, and maybe we should just kind of close this session, and we'll have a discussion of how we can support you in the coffee talk. We would like to have an interactive discussion. Do throw stuff in the Q&A. Nigel says, I would appreciate any and all guidance. Well, we've given you guidance. And if you give us a call, maybe we'll walk through it with you or something. But do think of these questions. Where would this be good for you? And then what would you need to make progress? And I would encourage you just to try. I mean, as I say, once we sort of figured this out, for a sort of mature decision professional who can combine analytics and facilitation, this is an easy workshop. It's not like we're adding very much new, it's just we're focusing on a new thing. So as you do this, we'd appreciate on how this works for the people you try it with, how it works for you as a facilitation guide, and any ideas on how to move the ball, particularly around making the dashboard routine, because that's something that a lot of people commented on as a sort of next step request. So as a way to wrap this up, I want to give shout outs to a lot of people. The iigy group is a large and slightly chaotic interest group. iigy group is different than other SDP interest groups in that it's project-based. We do innovation. And so what happens is we kind of get a core group that does a lot of stuff. And then we have a larger group that pops in and out and makes important contributions and so on. So there are many people who have contributed, and I've appreciated all the perspectives. These are the ones that I could find easily. There are many others I may have missed. And then the ones I've highlighted are the ones who actually participated in interviews. So one of the neat things about iigy is that you get to go onto the inside. It's an opening to talk to executives in a way that's often difficult for decision professionals. So I think these folks have not only make a real contribution to iigy and the work we've done, but also have had an opportunity to get some real insights and connect with people that they might not otherwise be able to talk to. So thank you to everybody who support this. I would like to invite all of you to join iigy and participate in our next project. We do have one success under our belt. So if you don't know about this, go pull it off the SDP website. It's the decision complexity card. There is a webinar helping decision makers take the bold act of declaring a decision. And this is for your use. It's got a little guide and everything. And the second one is this contingency dashboard. And next up, we're focusing on ESG decisions. So Dan Schneider is leading the ESG interest group. And the basic issue is that many organizations have bold ESG strategies that aren't translating into effective action on the ground. So we think there's something going wrong with decision making. And ESG here is taken very broadly. This could mean energy transition. It could mean, I mean, this is the thing about these discovery interviews is you don't assume a lot about the decision. You just ask a question like, what's going on in ESG decisions? And then whatever they say counts. So there are interviews under the way. We are finding ESG executives. Here's our definition. We need to find people who have faced important choices with significant ESG content or complications. So we don't want people to theorize about it. We don't want people to talk about change management. We want to zoom in on the decision. What's a decision you have faced or been involved in that has significant ESG content or implications? And then you basically ask what your experience was of that. And we have some training and coaching on how to get the experience out of the decision. Talk to me or Wayne or Dan Schneider. And I think they've done 2 or maybe 3 interviews, and there are more spinning up. And we need to network to these people and to conduct the interviews as that goes forward. So with that, I'll end my remarks. Wayne, anything to add?
Nope. And I hear the church bells chiming, so I think that's the end of our time. Yeah.
Well,
Okay,
thanks
so
for everyone.
Hilda, yeah.
Yes. I was just going to thank everybody for participating. We hope to see you in the open mic session. This is something new that we've launched today. So we'd like to get your feedback. So if you want to log out of this, and I put the link in the chat, and just join us in the Zoom room where you'll have your camera on, and then you can have a discussion with David and Wayne and continue the conversation. For those of you who are not able to join us, thank you for participating. And I'd like to remind you that this webinar and all previous webinars are posted on the SDP website at decisionprofessionals.com. Thank you again, Wayne and David, and we'll see you in the other room.